Welcome everybody to episode 17 of Black, Brown, Yellow, White. Today I have the extraordinary privilege to have Portia Lujabe from Cape Town with me. She's an educator and English teacher, and I'm super happy to have you here today, Portia.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm interested to see how the conversation is going to go.
Let's see. So the first question, obviously, to get to know you a little better, what can you tell us about your activity as an educator and how you got there? Just a little 2-minute biopic of your life, so to speak.
Okay, so my journey towards being an educator wasn't really so straightforward. Like, I didn't know that I was definitely going to end up as a teacher, but I always had it kind of at the back of my head because I knew from like the get-go in high school that I wanted to be in a field that worked with people.
Yeah.
And so I initially wanted to do psychology and become a psychologist. But over time, I realized that um, teaching was kind of calling me. And I ended up teaching actually at the school that I went to as a student myself.
Yeah.
And I've been I've been there ever since. And it's been an interesting journey. It's been interesting. It's challenging, but also really rewarding. And there's still a lot more to kind of grow, and develop.
Yeah. And then the question is, what are, so to speak, maybe you can remember off the bat, maybe it's a bit difficult, some of the highlights, some of the stuff that stuck with you, 1 or 2 episodes that like are ingrained?
I think things that have stuck out to me is like how important it is to make connections with people, and how significant like a proper relationship can go, and like how significant it is. Because for example, let's say if a student is struggling and you don't have a very good relationship with the student, but you want the best for the student, it's very difficult to like make any significant changes. But like when you have a good relationship with a student, it really changes the whole dynamic of how you approach the situation, of how they feel motivated. So basically just like connections.
Yeah.
Also, I've been always like quite a introverted person, and it's been hard for me to actually like talk to people, and I have like a little bit of social anxiety sometimes. But like standing in front of kids and having to like interact with them, I've actually noticed the importance of making connections, and I've become better at it as well in my own like personal life with friends and so on. Maybe another thing that stuck out with me, I think being a student, studying towards education at one point, in South Africa in I think it was 2015, 2016, we had these student movements called Fees Must Fall, like hashtag Fees Must Fall. And this was a student movement like across South Africa, and I was in one of them in Stellenbosch University. And it was a fight kind of for education, the right to education, because Nelson Mandela and like all the freedom fighters have told us in the past, it was like we wanted democracy in South Africa, a future in South Africa where kids can have the right to education. And then I was like one of the, you could say, the born free kids, because I was born after 1994, after democracy. But like when I went to university, it was really expensive. We couldn't afford tuition, we couldn't afford accommodation. There was such an inequality between Black students, students of color, and our white peers who had more like money. And so there was such a difference between that. And we said to ourselves, like, is this really like the right to education that we like? This is not really it, and so we need to open up the doors of access to education. And that really fueled me, I think, also to making sure that at this school where I'm at, the kids like have the real right to education, not just not just to say to them, oh, by the way, you can go study this and this after high school, but not like actually have the means to go and study there. So we need to make sure that kids have like all the resources necessary. Yeah.
You've mentioned these educational inequalities. Now, I would like to make a big, deep jump into the center of the interview series, and we'll circle back, of course, to these issues. And that is namely what, for you, is your understanding of racism, and what's most urgent about racism right now in South Africa.
Okay. So my understanding of racism, I see it from like an anti-black perspective primarily, where I've seen racism like historically being where you like enforce laws that basically inhibit black people from thriving, where you're discriminating against people of color specifically, where black people have been marginalized. That's kind of my understanding of racism. And it's not to say that not like everyone can experience discrimination based on race, but I believe that there are maybe it's a little bit disproportionate when it comes to black folks historically. And so in South Africa, I think it plays a really, really huge role in this kind of school that you go to. So, like, racism is definitely institutionalized here. Like, it's like if you live in Khayelitsha, which is a township in Cape Town, you're basically almost destined to the schools in that area where they're also under-resourced, for example, and in order to get to a better school with better quality and more textbooks and more access to technology and things, you need to either have a lot of money, and even if you have money, like to go to a school with high fees, but like even if you have a lot of money, you might not have the correct address in order to be able to be accepted to that school. And they sometimes there was like this policy where they only enforce or they only allow kids within a 5 to 10 kilometer radius of that area to go to that school. And so you can imagine in a country like South Africa, where we've had laws that make sure that people live in different places in the past, right? That kids who live in white affluent areas are only going to get access to those schools, and kids in black and poorer areas are only going to get access to those schools. This is not to say that there aren't brilliant teachers in township schools, right? But it's the fact that the government hasn't given enough resources in the past to those schools, and so they're still suffering to this day. You can feel the repercussions. You can see it in the whole school team, like the staff, and also the students themselves face so much other like social issues, and there isn't enough of a system to help fight it, like counselors and social workers and all of those things. So township schools end up being like the worst end of the stick, and this is all because of the racism in South Africa and the past that we come from. We're trying to undo it, but there's so many factors to it. It's going to take forever.
And as a kind of counterbalance to this negative aspect of racism, sometimes we also talk about sexism. As a kind of counterweight, I like to talk in my interviews about diversity and what do you see as diversity, and within South Africa, especially within the educational system, where do you see the status of diversity?
I think it is getting better. It is getting better. The nice thing about a lot of South African laws is that like they fall on the constitution. They all go under the constitution, which is quite progressive. So like the constitution wants to make rights for like LGBT students, for like that all genders thrive in all environments. And so I think we are getting there. I think maybe there are some shortfallings in places where we can get a little bit better.
Yeah.
And maybe it is like a more of like also a global issue. And yeah, like for example, if I think of just about like in my classroom, so I have I have different types of students. I have like Christian, Muslim students, students that believe in African spirituality, and students that are non-believers.
Mhm.
And as we know, like religion sometimes can play a role in how you think about like different genders,
Yeah.
right? And who you're attracted to, sexuality and those things. And so it's difficult sometimes if I find, let's say, like I'm an English teacher and I have to set up like a comprehension test and I have to use an article, which I find really interesting about like a young person who is LGBTQ identifying and their experiences. And I want to take this into my classroom and kind of
Yeah.
like have the students pick it apart, but like from their own perspectives,
Mhm.
because that's a good thing. It's a good thing to get like a Christian student's view on the LGBTQ issue
Yeah.
and a Muslim student's view, but at the same time to pay like mind to the fact that there are students in my class who are LGBT identifying,
Yeah.
and that they need to also feel safe in this space,
Yeah.
right? Because yeah, like it's just difficult because a lot of sometimes the religious view can be quite strong and conservative and like might infringe on someone else's like experience and but and rights even. But you also have to allow the platform, I believe, for
Yeah.
those difficult conversations or ugly conversations to happen before you can get anywhere. We can't hide and pretend. I can't hide, like we can't pretend that people don't think the horrid things that they might as a
Yeah.
result of where they come from, right? I mean, I'm a closer person myself, meaning that in our culture we also have a very patriarchal view about life and things like that. So I'm also always cognizant of where my own views are coming from. But in order to get anywhere, we need to actually get just the ugly stuff out. We need to be honest with where we all stand. And so in my class, I try to make that like quite clear. It's difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
I can't always control what the kid's gonna say.
Exactly.
So we have some work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
I would like to make the link now a bit between, as you've already done actually, between your job and some of these central topics of the series. And the first question is very blunt and straightforward, namely, how can education, in your opinion, take a role in anti-racism?
I think education is probably key to anti-racism because you need to be able to identify when racism is occurring, and sometimes that requires like certain knowledge and certain like ways of understanding of how racism can work. It can be institutionalized, it can be like totally direct, and it can be black, centered towards black people, but it can also just be like like ethnically, or like xenophobic, or like there's different levels of racism. And so we need to be educated about those different types, and also I think education gives you the skill to talk about it. It gives you like the platform, almost a better platform to be heard.
Yeah.
It instills in young people that there is an issue that does need to be addressed, and the best way that you can instill things in young people is usually through education, right? Because kids have to go to school, and so that's kind of where I see the role of education. It's like it's a critical one, and we shouldn't ignore the importance of education and the fact that like we need to utilize it to make the changes that we want to see in society.
Looking at your school and probably many other schools a bit more in detail, isiXhosa is one of the original African languages of the region, which is taught And where do you see the status and the relevance of teaching the original African languages at school? Why is it important in this
Hmm.
day and age?
That's an interesting one because I think there's so many different aspects to it. There is the fact that isiXhosa till this day is not really recognized as much as it should be. So
Yeah.
in South Africa, if you are not Xhosa speaking, or let's just say in the Western Cape or Cape Town, where primarily a lot of black people will speak isiXhosa,
Mhm.
if you are someone that's not black,
Mm.
usually you wouldn't actually understand isiXhosa, even though majority of the black people that live there, who are actually the majority of the
Yeah.
population, speak isiXhosa, right? The average white person in Cape Town won't be able to understand me when I speak
Yeah.
isiXhosa. And so we need to recognize that the language is not like it hasn't been given enough recognition.
Mm.
Um, we haven't really we've centered the world, our world, around like understanding English so much, and we've given it more importance than the African languages.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people, for example, like when I was younger, I went to a primarily white school where we spoke English, but
Uh-huh.
at home I had to speak Xhosa. And I realized at one point, like late in my teenage life, was like, I actually don't have a full like native understanding of each of these languages.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm struggling, or I mean, I was good at English, I was good okay at Xhosa, but like I'm not like a native speaker of
Mm.
either. It's like a weird space to be in. Um, and so I think there's more space for Xhosa kids to also learn isiXhosa themselves. Because sometimes what our parents will do, and this is like a mindset that they have from apartheid, is to say like, oh, in order for you to have better opportunities, you need to learn to speak English. And so
Yeah.
let's prioritize that and forego isiXhosa.
Yeah.
And so we have like a Xhosa teacher, for example, who's very, really passionate about like developing the language, and that's great. And there's a few people who do that in South Africa, and it's amazing. They change like the signage and documents, and they translate things, and it's
Mm.
beautiful. But then on the other end, there has also in South Africa been like languages are very political because there has been a push historically for Afrikaans language to become the
Yeah.
medium. And Afrikaans is like a derivative language of the Dutch, right? And so it is a little bit of a power struggle because now it's like, oh well, the white colonialists want us to now learn in this language, and but also it's become a language which is like almost creolized, and like even colored or black people in Cape Town in South Africa actually speak a different version of Afrikaans itself. So it's like we can't forgo the entire language because it now is it's like attached to people's actual culture, black people's culture, even because they had to speak that language when they came on, during slavery times or whatever. So South Africa is a really weird nation when it comes to like the politics of language.
Yeah.
But I would say, I think just in order to keep the peace, it's like it's just a good thing to learn English. Everyone should just learn to speak English, but we should recognize that other languages need to be prioritized as well. So it's a good thing for every school to offer not only just English, but like
Yeah.
Afrikaans, as well as maybe the language of that province, like
Yeah.
the ethnical language of that province. So whether that be Xhosa or Zulu or whatever. I
Yeah.
think it's good to have multiple options in your school and not just the two, English and Afrikaans.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. A very direct and again, I guess, sort of blunt question is you, as a black woman in your journey through the South African educational system, what have been your encounters with or confrontations with discrimination? Could be racism, sexism. What have been your encounters and what have been your means of dealing with this?
Okay. Yeah, it is quite a like a personal one, but I don't mind talking about it because it's actually something that I think I'm still currently trying to find a way to cope with
Yeah.
and to resolve. But I for example, I'm going to talk about my personal experience, like
Yeah,
at the school I'm at, and I hope no one from there will ever listen to this. But like at the school I'm at, for example, it's very very progressive,
yeah,
on paper, and even in within the staff, like it's amazing for that. We have a group of, like, there's a whole range, like a diversity, like
yeah,
old teachers, young teachers, gay teachers, straight teachers,
yeah,
different colors. But in my department, in the English department, there's been there's also a strong push from our HOD,
mm,
head of department, to kind of like um, bring decolonial books to the forefront, which
yeah,
is great, right? And I remember in my interview like 4 years ago, they said to me, like, we want to push a little bit more, like centering around Africa, and we think that you have a passion for this. So like, what books would you like recommend, or how would you bring this into the classroom?
yeah,
And I felt excited. I was like, I love being in a school that is so progressive and like,
mm,
but that's not the full picture. And it's still South Africa, where we have a lot of like undoing to still do,
oh,
because it doesn't mean that racism doesn't still exist and affect me. And I think the people that I work with, for example, are, if they're not necessarily black and understand my experiences, there's certain conflicts that we might have as a result of that, and it's difficult sometimes for them to see the bigger picture.
yeah,
um, and yeah, so like sometimes I've had a little bit of conflict, which I believe is racialized.
yeah,
I think being a young black woman, I have to almost prove myself like twice as much
yeah,
than my white counterparts. And yeah, like for example, men in my team that are also even black themselves. So like, I feel like there's a lot of proving that I need to do,
yeah,
and it's draining sometimes, and it just sucks a lot of you, and it really demotivates you. But I'm finding ways to cope around that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And when I was talking earlier to a playwright here in Switzerland, her name is Fatima Mumuni. She's a playwright and rapper, and she said at one point, "Ich will nicht mehr die Rassismus-Tante sein. I don't want to be the racism auntie," because she had been doing so many workshops on the topic, and the topic kept coming up again and again. And so I've realized a lot of the people I've been talking to have mentioned racism fatigue. How do you see this
Ooh.
issue of racism fatigue? Is that something you can relate to in any way?
Yes, yes. I think it's like a point. It's like at a point in which you begin to disassociate.
Mm,
Like, you see the problem, you can identify the problem, or you have your own way of like kind of framing the problem, and you see it as a racist issue. But it's sometimes difficult to convince the other party that it is a racist issue. And so yeah, because you don't want to be called problematic, um, difficult to work with, like you begin to just swallow it and be like, okay, in order to move on from the issue, let me just let it slide. And then
yeah,
you keep letting it slide, and you keep letting it slide, and because you're tired. So it's racism
yeah,
fatigue. It is trying to kind of also protect yourself in a sense, because there are students that need me. I
yes,
need to protect my energy for them and give it my all for them. And if I'm constantly fighting with the adults who refuse to recognize the racism that is at play, um, there's nothing that's going to be left of me. And
yeah,
so I think that is really a thing. I'm glad that they've put like a term to it,
yeah,
that feeling of just being tired of constantly fighting. And so you just say, okay, let's move on.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Okay, we already come to the second to last section, the non-trigger trigger. Hopefully triggering thoughts and associations and freewheeling
Okay.
thoughts, and hopefully non-triggering in the traumatic sense. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Education.
Tiring.
Cape Town.
Beautiful, tourists, expensive.
Montessori.
Interesting to look at. I like it.
Can I touch your hair?
No.
Sindiwe Magona.
Inspiring. I met her once
Oh,
and it
wow.
was an honor.
Wow, that's amazing. isiXhosa.
My mother tongue, a lot of love for the culture.
South Africa.
Needs a lot of work.
Steve Biko.
Black consciousness.
Creativity.
I'm trying.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Portia. We still have a last little segment to go if you don't mind.
Okay, that was fun.
Yeah, you did really well. Like in your life, what have been some of your personal practices that have been, have had a positive impact, have been maybe productive, that just are good to you, have been good to you?
And when I was a student, I started like a little business to make money by
Yeah.
doing people's hair,
Uh,
and I even created a YouTube channel about it at one point. But the point was like I realized it was actually more than just a making money thing. It was like a space for me to actually be creative.
yeah.
And I've been trying to go back into that space again and to kind of develop that business and see what I can come up with, because it's also like I don't know, I get to learn about my roots, like African roots as well, because there's so much to learn about like African hair history. It's so random, but like I love it so much and I geek out on it, and it's like a space that's just away from like the everyday stress of like work. So that's something that I'm looking into again, and that's something I love. And yeah, just trying to stay healthy, exercise, but it's difficult, but I think it's something that is important to stay energized just from literally the day to day.
So you are an English teacher, and I would like to ask you 2 or 3 book recommendations, fiction, non-fiction. If you guys, ladies, read this, you will be a happier, better person.
I think the girl with the louding voice.
Yeah.
It's a book that I've been dying to read, and I just like what it sounds like. It sounds like it's got really deep, difficult issues to deal with, like a young girl that basically gets married off to an older man. But apparently the way that it's narrated is like from her perspective as like literally this 10-11-year-old girl that's like really silly and really amusing and funny. And it's a book that I actually want to do with like in a book club with my students. So I'm starting that next week, and I'm going to recommend everyone else read it.
Yeah.
And then there is this other book which we created as a set work last year called Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Adichie. And gosh, there are just so many interesting like themes in there. Themes about like gender, African feminism, religion, and like power, and just there's a lot. So I would recommend it if you like that sort of thing, based on a family and a girl that is undergoing her education and like just a bildungsroman, development. Maybe also Nervous Conditions. Nervous Conditions by I forget her name.
I think.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think that book was transformative for me. It was maybe the first time I ever read a book that I felt like spoke to me as an African person. Because up until that point, I didn't know that like you had African writers, even like people that had shared a similar experience to you. And our experiences, me and the main like character in this book, are so different, but like in the sense of just it being African was enough to like inspire so much joy in me. Also, I love the first line. First line was like, I was not saddened by my brother's death.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, and you're just like, okay, why? What's happening? It's
A
a
good
lot.
tough start, yeah. Are there maybe some kind of, recurring questions, queries, ghost stuff that haunts you, that keeps coming back? Something that, something that you just want to kind of get to the bottom of, that keeps coming back to your mind.
Mm, maybe just since you mentioned that racism fatigue, I'm
Yeah,
wondering like how do people deal with it? Like I'm gonna go home now. Like I'm gonna go and like Google it
yeah,
after this because I'm very like interested in the concept after you've
yeah.
mentioned it. So I think that's something that's kind of like that I'm taking away from this interview as well.
Mm.
But yeah, I that's all for now.
Okay. Hey, Portia, thank you so much. It's been a truly amazing interview with many new ideas and concepts and experiences to think
Yeah,
about. And
thanks.
I also want to thank the viewers from South Africa, because it's about 5% of my viewership, which sounds like a little, but
Yeah.
90% is taken up by India. So South Africa is like the second biggest. Yeah. Portia, thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Okay, thank you so much. It was lovely to talk to you about this.